committee meeting on the agenda is the South Sycamore Street transfer of funds into the community crossings. If you just kind of flip through there, you'll see the ordinances that we wrote up. Back in August, we wrote an ordinance to match up to $750,000 for the South Sycamore Street project. Central Paving won the bid on that project, and they've already started if you've been over that way. The state sent their funds in, but their bid came in actually about, $150,000 under the engineer's estimate. So in order to match the 50-50 match, we'll need to transfer into the community crossing funds from the MVH 203, $675,000. If you look, there's a page in there that kind of shows you the schedule. They got started in April. They're working with Dykeman and Milestone, who did a lot of the curbing and stuff down on the Erie project, and Slessor's Greenhouse. So they were looking at having this done. I think their goal is to be finished before school starts in the fall. Their project end they're hoping for is August 11th. So if you guys are okay with that, we'll transfer those funds over. Okay. All right. Next one is the FAST Act. And Dwayne, did you get a chance to look at the ordinance and the resolution on that? Basically, what we have on that one is this was the one of the federal grants we got for the sidewalk and ADA for the corners. When we originally wrote the ordinance up, we wrote it up with a 4-digit fund number, and unfortunately, we still don't have 4-digit fund numbers. Dwayne's in the process of getting that changed over. We wrote a resolution in 2023 to correct that to where it also has a 3-digit fund number, and basically we just have to go back and the transfer for last year never got made. So there'll be a transfer made of 74,000, and I can't remember the exact number there. $74,460, and if we transfer that over, we'll have made 2 of the 5 payments on that project. That, Scott?
Sure.
Amy? All right.
ADA, was this for all over town, or where was this specifically for?
These are the projects where they were doing sidewalks and intersections around schools. Phase 2, I believe, was Jacob's here. He might be able to help me. Ivy Tech,
Franklin,
the new school, the intermediate school.
okay.
I believe a little bit more of Franklin and Columbia.
Anything that changed with Franklin changing over?
As far as I know, it's still moving ahead. It'll be the alternate, or the.
This was the one that didn't do a foot traffic study, so they didn't even know if anybody was even using these sidewalks.
I don't know, Scott.
I asked the gentleman before, and he said, no, he said he saved us money by doing it. And these start when?
Well, this project has started, but they won't do the physical work until about 2026. They're doing all the surveying and whatnot. I was gonna also bring up, I didn't bring the details with me, but Jacob, on that, I noticed when I was looking at the numbers on these, that the state highway is doing all those ADAs out 3rd Street, so we should be able to cut that project down some and
Yeah, we actually talked to the engineer about that this last week.
okay. Yeah, there's quite a few of them that'll be done ahead of time, so that should save us some funds there. All right, Bill, you want to come up and talk about the revolving? You guys look at that first page, it kind of outlines the 3 things Bill will be talking about. revolving loan program that deals with the council and the RDC.
We talked about this last month. At your last meeting, you approved on first reading ordinance 2023-15 and 2023-16. We had two missing items, basically the amount that we needed to fill in for this revolving loan, and then the appropriation hearing. The amount is the budgeted item for RDC, and they plan to spend up to $205,000 on these programs this year. So your ordinance will have, in the blanks, it'll have $205,000. To validate that number, council has to show that you've spent at least that much money within TIF districts for economic development. And that was no problem coming up with money spent. Dave has a list of items that he's verified.
On the notice to the taxpayers that they have billed, it shows, basically, we just use the MSRP. We spent $373,000 on that, so that more than covers.
So logistically, if you approve it in second reading on June 5th, my understanding is RDC will disperse $205,000 to you. You'll have a new fund. They're still the approving project body. They would submit it to you that they have approved X, Y, and Z for $25,000, and then you would use that fund to pay for it. So it's RDC money, it's just going through you now to appease the SBOA.
Wait, 25 or 205?
As an example, 205 is a total amount.
Oh, okay,
Let's say we have a project that RDC wants to fund 25,000 for a facade.
okay.
They'll have to come to you or submit that request to you, and then you fund it. But essentially, it's their money.
So then, just to be sure that we'd have to write like a resolution saying we're going,
It'll be a Dwayne.
The way I understood it, with the way that I thought that they were gonna word the resolutions, it gave RDC the right to manage the fund. In other words, when you established this fund, you gave them the right to expend it the way they saw
so
fit.
they would basically write a resolution saying they're gonna take the money out of that fund.
That's the way I understood it, though.
Yeah, that technical part was a little confusing, but
I know I talked to Andy Mauser last week about some of this a little bit, and he's wanting to get together and make sure everybody's on the same page as we go forward with this, and make sure we don't run into the issues. I'm trying to set up a meeting with him and the State Board of Accounts right now so that
Okay.
everything flows smoothly.
the second piece is we have to hold an appropriation hearing for this $205,000. The Ferris Tribune will run that on May 25th. It's a 10-day notice. And at 6:20, 10 minutes before your regular meeting is what we have it set for. We'll have an appropriation hearing. We open it, if anybody's here, and we'll just go through what we just talked about. Those are the two items that were left out there after your first reading that we had to take care of before your second reading.
I have another question. Do we need to give this fund a number? And if we do, I would assume we have to give it a fund number. Can we incorporate that into and amend the ordinance for the June 5th meeting so it's in place?
We can, yeah. Yeah, we'll have to give it a number, and I suggest to make it work right now, we can come up with those numbers. A 4
Dual.
and a 4 and a 3. We just need 3 to get it going. So then it'll just be an amendment of that resolution that we used to bring everything back. I think that was 23-116 or something like that was the resolution. I looked at it today, that has that wording in it that lets us do that. So we'll just amend that one. I can get the numbers for us for tomorrow.
And the other question, and still confusion for me, Bill, is how do we refund it? Once it runs out of money, how do we go about putting more, how does the money go in the
I think
next
it's,
time?
I think it's going to be an annualized process based on their budget. So that's what they have budgeted for '23. I think once we know what they're budgeting for '24, which under new state code, they have to do a budget, a line item budget for RDC. Let's say it's 300,000. They would need to get on your agenda before the start of the year to have this process for next year. That's my understanding.
But do we have to come up with 300,000 to do the same thing we just did, we're doing now? You see what I'm saying? Would we have to be able to show we spent 300,000 so that, I mean, I guess I'm confused on how it continues.
I think once it is used up, then we'll have to refill the bucket. Yeah, so if you found 500,000 off the bat, once we use up that bucket, we have to find more items that you've spent money on.
But any money that's left in there from the previous year can be.
Hasn't been used, and the purpose hasn't, correct.
Right, it's a non-reverting.
You don't have to verify more projects that you've done until you meet that number.
Till you get to 205.
So on your list that you provided them, how much was on that list?
373.
So until you exceed that, we don't have to refill that bucket.
Well, that was what I wondered about, and eventually you might just have to do a project for them.
Yeah.
So that you can fill the bucket for the next year. Okay. All right. You guys all right? Want to go ahead and do the other one while you're up there, Bill, or?
Yeah. The other one being Chase Davis? Just a real quick reminder of where we're at with this. Back in December of '21, the property on Chase and Davis became available for sale. At that time, RDC wanted to put an offer in for $650,000. On November 1st, 2021, you guys voted 7-0 in support of RDC buying that for $650,000. Real quick, we were the second offer. We did not get the property. Here we are a year and a half later working through this. On that resolution, you were approving $650 with our assumption it would not appraise out high enough. Or we were just doing it in case it did not appraise high enough. The resolution you have now, I assume they have a copy, Dave?
I do not believe I got a copy to them.
The resolution now is not, we're not requesting any money from city council. We're not even requesting that you approve the purchase of RDC buying it. And the reason is the appraisal came in at $752,000. So since the appraisal came in more than the sales price, you do not have to, quote, authorize RDC to buy it. They can buy it on their own. In the last year and a half, we've done site analysis on the property. We've done annexation analysis. We've done geotech work. We've done a wetland study. We've done environmental study. Again, appraisal for 752. And RDC is ready to move forward. What the resolution is basically asking for your support. We are going to move forward after purchase to annex the property. So RDC doesn't want to buy the property for the $700,000 if council does not support that land being annexed. It would be a voluntary annexation. Annexation laws have changed greatly over the last 10 years. It used to be you had to show up in opposition of it, now you need 60% people to show up wanting it, which, as you can tell from audiences, having 60% of anything isn't very feasible. With RDC being the only owner of the property, obviously them showing up would be 100% in support of annexing it. There's no desire to annex anybody else. Even if there was, they would have to show up in 60% approval to be annexed. So basically, RDC wants to move forward with the $700,000 purchase, which is under appraised value. But they need the assurance from you, your group, that you're in support of the annexation post-purchase. That's really the only thing your resolution states.
Thoughts
Yeah.
on that, or?
Well, I'm for getting that, for doing that. I know we've gotten emails against it, but I support it.
You gonna knock down all those trees and that woods there on this property?
Initially, nothing will be done. There's not, the goal for, I'm speaking on their behalf, they can clarify it, but the goal is to capture the property and annex it, to raise the base of the assessed values with whatever homes go there, or commercial, whatever ends up being decided. Right now, it's in the county, and you do not receive that property tax, and you would not receive the income tax if houses were there, because it's in the county, not the city. So our goal is to annex, RDC's goal is to annex that. As far as development plans and things like that, that can be a public discussion. That could be you working with RDC and me and whoever else in the public that wants to be involved. Most of those trees will not be able to be removed. It's a wetland area. The only wetland area that you really can't disturb is there's a little creek there in those trees. So anytime you have a delineation of wetland delineation, you can't disturb that area.
That be heated too, to not be disturbing that or take those trees down?
Would it be what?
Would that be, they respect that?
You have to respect that. That's why we got the wetland study. Of whatever's in that area, that's a designed wetland, you can't touch it. So it won't be really respecting it, you won't be able to do it.
And so we're approving just the blessing for the RDC?
Basically, if RDC approves it, or when they purchase it, early June is the timeline after your meeting. When we move forward with the annexation process, you will be in support of it when we get to that point. That's really all this is like a pre-support letter / resolution. That we want to make sure that you're for this before we go through all the expense of buying it and be stuck with a piece of property that isn't in our territory.
Approximately how many houses are we talking about putting on this?
Again, that's up for public discussion. Quick layout, you could have 30-ish homes if that's what you chose to do.
Public's going to decide what type of housing goes out.
We're willing to, RDC is willing to bring that discussion to the groups and put our heads together and see what's best for out there.
Okay.
I think with that school going in, that would be very
Yeah, right now it's
realistic.
kind of you can see where the county and cities change. We go city on Davis, then it turns to county, and as it wraps around the roundabout, it's still county, then it turns into city where the school is. So it's kind of this odd meandering of split. So yeah, I think it would be good I think it's a good area.
And we'll be taking the property taxes from that area then?
You will after it annexes. Right now, you're not receiving that.
Okay.
Which once we purchase it, there won't be any property taxes on it.
as we own it, there won't be until it's developed into a private industry, yeah.
Right now.
And we're only losing about $1,200 in property taxes by it converting from a private owner to a RDC-owned property. It's just not, it's assessed as farmland.
And
The zoning is appropriate. It's a fringe residential zoning. So that work's been done. We've already done the annexation pre-work to make sure that we can do it. And we can. We're using Bose McKinney for that. So there's been a lot of prep, soft costs being done. So we're kind of in the finishing stages here of getting your support, RDC's approval, final approval, and then the purchase will be early to mid-June. The actual annexation process takes about 5 to 6 months on the voluntary annexation.
got an arrangement where RDC will get the crop rental. Is that correct? If once it's.
Correct. We have a farm lease with Dana Scott right now. Farms it until we get to the point where we're going to develop it. It'll continue to be farmland. And that lease is being turned over to RDC.
Paul, did you want to say? Oh, wait a minute. I think I got somebody else wants to call in. Maybe. Hey, Nancy, I'll have to call you back. Sorry, Bill. The one time I got my phone on.
Turn those things off for meetings.
My wife says, why don't you ever turn your phone on? And I-
Basically, I'm going to make the case against annexing property. And just to share with you my thoughts as to why. We have a major infrastructure problem headed down the road. We have streets, we have sidewalks, we have street trees, we are replacing all the piping in the city. We have roads that are going to have to be repaved. This is our basic infrastructure. Annexing more land means eventually creating more infrastructure. That infrastructure is very expensive, as we know with the property behind Walmart. We're spending a couple $1 million to put in streets for 53 houses that probably will never get built. I went to the housing meeting back in the Kitchell administration where we talked about that project. They brought in Crestline and they brought in a developer from Fort Wayne who both said the same thing. That's not what you should be building there. And we've now gone down the road to the point where we're going to try to do all this infrastructure for 53 houses that we probably will not be able to sell. Same situation here. We need to be proactive and start thinking about not this year or next year, but where are we at 10 years down the road? If you look at the population of Logansport, at its best, it was 21,800 in 1920. The entire population resided in 1/3 the space that it resides in today. In the 1950s, after World War II, we started building subdivisions out on the east end near the school. We built all those subdivisions, and we said, well, guess what? I read the paper back then. They said, we're going to be a city of 50,000 people because we're building all these homes out here. All these young people are going to come in. They're going to raise families. They're going to move to Logansport. We're going to expand the size of the city. After that, it was east we go, and let's build the mall, and let's build all this stuff, and we will become a powerhouse in the community, and we'll have 50,000 people living here. Well, that didn't happen either. We still have the burden of the infrastructure that's there that's not used, and we'll have it for a very long time. Also, is there a need for this housing is a big question. And I've looked at the most current survey that was done by the city and the Parks Board, and it talks about the demographics of the people who presently live in Logansport. If we look as a community as who would be buying housing here, currently 55% of the population is under $50,000 a year. If you're making $50,000 a year, you really can't buy a new house. You'll probably never buy a new house, and you can't rent at today's rates. And some weird things are going on. If we look at this little pie here, this is 6% of the population. 6% of the people in Logansport that responded to the survey said they have a household income over $150,000 dollars a year. Who are those people? Well, it's the retired college professor who bought a historic house at 18th and Broadway. It's the guy from North Carolina who bought the church down near the Brewers, who's turning that into a single family. It's the couple from Lafayette who bought the house on Bankers Row and are restoring it. It's a chiropractor on North Street who's restoring a house in the 800 block. It's the people who bought from Lafayette who bought the Pollard house. So the people who are moving here and spending the money are spending the money within the city that we already have. If we look at that and see where these people are at the upper end are at, none of these people, with the exception of the over 150,000 crowd, are going to be able to afford to buy a new house that would be as expensive as these would need to be at today's cost. So the question becomes, are we expanding because we expect there to be a big influx of executives coming to Logansport who want large houses on large lots? If you look at the area around there and the additions that are already there, like Hasty Hills and some of the others, there are still vacant lots up in those neighborhoods up there that have been vacant for 20 years. They've been on the market, and they've not sold. We might like to think we could build a new subdivision, and all these people are going to show up, but the reality of it is the lots are already out there to build on, and there are even lots within our current city limits. No one's building $500,000 houses in Logansport. The only construction we have had are the homes that Crestline built and the pole barn building at the corner of 9th and North Street. That does not seem to indicate that there is a great demand for housing right now. We do have a housing shortage, and we have a housing shortage because our home ownership rate has gone up in the last 3 years from 64% to 74%. 10% rise in home ownership. But where did that come from? That came from the landlords who got out of the business after COVID, who lost their shirt because people didn't pay their bills, and they just basically dumped the property. People came in, bought those houses, and are renovating them. And that's where this home ownership goes. At the same time, our poverty level, people living below poverty in Logansport, has gone down. It's gone from 24% to 12.2% according to the most recent data I got. How did that happen? Did everybody go out and get a job that paid a whole lot more money for them to get out of that poverty range? Or, as I think has happened, these people have basically left our community. They can't afford to buy an apartment, or can't afford to rent an apartment. They can't afford to buy a house, because even in the lower areas of the community along Erie and Midtown, you're going to pay $130,000 to buy a house in my neighborhood now. When I moved to my neighborhood in 2015, you could buy anything you wanted for 20 grand. So if we look at where we're allocating our money, it seems to make more sense to be allocating our monies within the core of our community. If luxury housing or housing of any kind is such a good deal at Chase and Davis Road, let the county do it. I'm amazed if it's such a good deal that some developer hasn't come along and wanted to buy that property. Another point to consider is the golf course over on Golfview just came up for sale. That property is $699,000. It's 82 acres. It's got a road running through it. It's got a clubhouse on it. It has a commanding view of the Wabash River and a 18-hole par 3 golf course. If a developer's looking to build, don't you think they're going to look at that property before they would ever think of building on Chase Road? So we may acquire a property that could sit there for 10 or 15 years, is not going to generate any taxable income for the city, and further down the road, when we have to develop that, we're going to spend millions of dollars in infrastructure on the hope that builders are going to build there. We don't know we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. We do know the cost of construction is going up. We do know the cost of building behind the Walmart is probably going to be a lot higher than we thought it would be. A simple 3-bedroom house with vinyl siding is going to cost you $300,000 now. 2 years from now, 2.5 years from now, what's it going to be? Closer to $350,000? If interest rates continue to go up, anyone who's looking at buying a house is going to be looking at that cost of ownership. It's going to be a higher amount. It's going to cost more. And we still, if we fill it, 53 houses, the amount of property taxes that we will gain from that property will barely pay the cost in another 10 years of what we will have to spend to go back in and redo the infrastructure again, because the sidewalks will be wore out, the streets will be wore out. There is really no upside for us to expand the size of the community at this time. We've got plenty of sites that we can build on currently within the city. There are sites we haven't even considered that we could build on, like maybe the Grass Farm, Dunwoody Park, Patriot Park, both of which council had agreed they wanted to get rid of. We have a lot of places within our community right now that are close to downtown, close to the amenities, that make far more sense to invest in. And before we invest a lot of money and a lot of time in infrastructure elsewhere, we need to think about what we have and how we can leverage the money that we presently spend within our own borders to make more sense, to be able to provide housing for those who can't afford it, to be able to build more worker housing, which right now, if you look at Peru, they took $1 million and they leveraged it with a private developer into a $20 million housing development with apartments, empty nester housing, the fitness center, and everything over there. So they took $1 million and turned it into $20 million and 120 units of housing. We take $1 million, we build a parking lot at Riverside Park. We're not thinking intelligently about the way we develop, and we're not thinking these things through completely before we do them. So I just encourage you, do some more research, look at the alternatives that we presently have for development, and think about if you really want to annex more land and ultimately be taking on more responsibility for the city. Thank you.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? Well, first of all, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm trying to be constructive here. You know, you come to a lot of our meetings, I appreciate your input, I really do. I agree with you sometimes I don't, but I would appreciate it, quite honestly, if when you shared information on social media, that it was accurate, or at least close to accurate. You know, we did talk about the golf course. The golf course has been for sale for a while, maybe not as public as it is now, I don't know. I would venture to say you can see the Wabash River from Par 3, but maybe you can. My sister lived out there on the hill. I never saw the Wabash River. So, and when you talk about poverty, part of the reason our poverty has changed is we got an employer out west of town that employs over 2,000 people and used to try to pay people poverty wages, and finally realized that if they wanted to minimize their turnover, all they needed to pay people a working wage. We've found, just from the few grants that we've looked into and used, that the wages at Tyson's has greatly affected our low-income ability to get grant funding. So when you talk about that number, you know, what you said, I think is a little bit misleading.
So these are your numbers from your new city study.
Well, I'm not talking about the percentages, I'm talking about how they got there.
That's not a Census Bureau.
And the last thought I'd have, Paul, and I do mean this, I mean, when we did our housing study, it said we needed all types of housing. I don't have any issue. You know, there are things behind the scene that maybe you don't know yet, because there are a lot of people that look at doing things within your city don't want it to be public until they're ready to actually pull the plug, because they don't want the rumor mill started if they decide they don't want to come around. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think you're a little short-sighted sometimes in the way you talk about the council, the RDC, the administration, and I encourage you to continue to come and speak your mind, but I just wish you'd be a little more to the point and not so, you know, we can all twist things the way we want them twisted.
Well, I think that the history.
That's all I got to say.
Right. I think the history of what we've already done speaks for itself. We can look at it, we can analyze it, we can see the mistakes that we've made in the past. And unlike other cities that are doing that, we seem to just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. We keep doing the same thing over and over. Peru, Wabash, even Delphi have learned to modify things that they thought they wouldn't do 10 years ago to fit the world that we live in today. That's just a fact. I know the council doesn't want to hear that sometimes. I know it's hard to hear that sometimes. But if you go out and talk to your constituents and you ask them, do they think you should be building on Chase Road? Or do you think you should be building in their neighborhood on vacant lots that are already there or property that's nearby them? They're going to tell you they'd rather see development in their own neighborhood. I don't know why we can't listen more to the community, because it's obvious just from the recent Parks Board study. If you look at the numbers on that Parks Board study, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It seems like the things the community thinks are important are the exact opposite of what the Parks Commission's currently doing. That's according to the numbers. You know, you look at what's important to the public, it's historic preservation, it's the farmer's market, it's more senior wellness programs. If you look at the overall list of things that was important in terms of what we already had, disc golf played higher than the golf course. So, I mean, I think you need to look at these things, and if that's what the community is telling you via these studies that you hire done, this is what we think, I think we have to start lending more credence to the community. I think we have to stop doing things in a vacuum with a small group of people, and I understand the whole developer thing. I work with developers myself. We're consultants with developers in the hotel industry, boutique hotels, B&Bs, and developers. I get that whole thing about you don't want to announce it until you're ready to do it. But at the same time, too much gets too far down the road that may or may not make sense, and then the community is blindsided by it and goes, well, who decided on this? So I just think you need to analyze all the data. It's like doing a term paper. You have to do your research to get an A on the term paper. And I think we make a lot of assumptions about things. I think we are hopeful about a lot of things. I mean, everybody was hopeful that the mall would be a success. It's sitting there. Nothing's being done in the Sears building. There's 3 cars in front of Harbor Freight. There's a couple cars in front of Burlington. We have a beautiful parking lot that the city paid for, sitting in front of there, that's empty. So, I mean, we're all wanting to see good things happen in this community, but I think we have to also think about the fact that as much as we want some, or hope that some things will happen, sometimes you have to just step back and analyze the facts on the ground, where the economy's going, where business is going, and I think you have to factor that in. So I think sometimes we're optimistic and we just go and say, oh, yes, we can do this, and we do it, and it doesn't work out the way we want it to. So that would be my response.
Hey,
I just have a couple of things. I'm not sure the total amount of people that filled out that survey. I know I personally did not myself. I know Bill Cuppy did not say those are going to be $500,000 homes. I know I personally am very interested in relocating out there myself if it were to be a neighborhood, because you have trails, you have the park. I don't want to live at Dunwoody Park. Right now, I personally don't like living at 9th and Broadway looking at a pole barn. So, no, people aren't going to support building in my neighborhood because they don't want to look at a pole barn. So, yes, it is attractive to a lot of people. And I would really be interested in how many people actually filled that survey out. If it's the Census Bureau, that's a different story.
Well, I've got data from the Census Bureau, but this is from your Central Parks Commission.
Yeah, and I don't think
Janet
that's,
can probably tell you how many responses they had.
and I don't think it's accurate, and I don't think it's skewed. And I did set the curve on research in college, so.
Paul threw a couple of subjective daggers out there at a couple projects. I want to let you know that we don't live in a world of hope here. We actually do analysis, and we have validating things that we do. Start with Lexington Village. We do have a developer, despite the comments. We will go public soon. You'll be very pleased with who it is. We're working on the agreement with Mr. Lehman. So there's a group that's working on that. It's just what we have to do. before we just get out there. Riverside Development, we're going to be announcing the developer group on Wednesday. You'll be very pleased with who they are, and you'll love the concept of this private investment that we've got. So it's not a hope. We work in reality, objective data, not subjective comments. So I'm proud of what we're doing, and I'm glad you guys are on board for the majority of it, and I hope you're interested in Jason Davis.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, and I would just say one thing, Bill, and I guess that maybe we run in different circles, but, not to be argumentative again, I've seen some negatives about Jason Davis, but the majority of the people that I've spoke with and have reached out to me have been very positive about that idea, about the idea of us having control. The talk is upper level housing. But you know what, if the right developer came along and he had the right plan and he wanted to do it, we'd be right there with him, whether it be all housing or some type of intermingled retail with it. We would entertain any idea. The whole idea is to annex it into the city so that we can have some control over how it is developed in the future.
All of these projects have gone through public hearings. I mean, we've all had RFPs and public hearings, and people can tell me what they think. And yeah, I even go little road shows with Kiwanis and Rotary and whatever it takes to tell the story. And honestly, I have not received any negative comments from anybody in those neighborhoods at Lexington Village, Riverside area. I have received a couple of negative Chase Davis comments. But it's all been factored on the fact that Ethan Manning owns the property.
That's the only that I
And
received.
I look at it like, who cares? I mean, it's a capitalism world that the guy bought the property before we did. He's going to make a little money on it. He's also had carrying costs for 18 months. So I have no problem. I wouldn't expect any of you to buy real estate and sell it for a loss. Wouldn't make any sense. So that's capitalism, and I have no problem that Ethan Manning is a seller. I've looked past that. He makes a buck on it. Oh, well, I still want the property.
Bill, on Lexington Village, you say there's a developer going to make a announcement soon?
Yep, once the agreement's done, we'll make it that day. We're about 75% through working through the points of it.
You have any ballpark estimates when the shovels are going to turn?
That's a separate one. We already have that contractor. They were supposed to be in June, now they've pushed us to July. It's F&K Construction was the bid winner for that. So you'll see them out there probably in July, hopefully. And they're already in talks with the developer of making sure what they're going to do works aligned with what they're doing. And we can work with people directly because we've gone through the RFP process and no one bids. Now I can work with individual groups without breaking any public notice, public meeting code. So yes, as soon as that agreement's done, we'll announce who it is, and that'll put a lot of people at ease knowing who it is.
Asking me about it.
I wish I could.
Did we, just a thought that came as we talked here, did Joe out there, has he still got the list of all the people that were interested in that subdivision?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was pretty decent list we already had of people that would be interested to move.
Yep. And, Paul's accurate in the fact that things take longer, construction costs are higher, carrying costs with interest rates are higher. But to say what it will be in 2 years, unless they're commodity experts, they have no idea what it's going to be. You can look at economists and see what it might be. But yes, interest rates are a factor. There's no doubt it'll increase the cost of house, and it will decrease the demand because of people can afford less with interest rates. That's just a factor in it, and we're working with it.
Any thoughts or comments on the Easter Hill properties aren't selling or empty lots in town that could be built on?
For one, there's plenty of construction going on. If you go up and down Marlington Road, there's 5 or 6 homes built back there. High Street's had several. They're not concentrated. Hasty Hill, I wasn't aware that there's, must not be very good at marketing it, if there's properties for sale back there. And some people like city services and city utilities, and I know I do. I would never want to live where there's a septic tank personally, but that's just me.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Thanks again. All right. Let's see, what do we got left here? Okay, we've got this, Erie Avenue, basically what we have there, and I don't believe I had any information on that. Jacob, can I ask you to kind of explain the situation with Erie Avenue and how we got worked out, we had an agreement worked out with NIPSCO for their delays because of their,
Is this to move that funding, is that?
yeah, yeah. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah, of course.
You can give them the history better than I can, so
Yeah,
thank you.
quite a history. So obviously, everybody noticed that there was some slowdown in the work on Erie Avenue through the course of, late or early fall this year. The issue was that in the utility coordination phase of the project, NIPSCO failed to provide our engineers accurate locates and depths of their services there. And so early on in the project, Dyckman, who was our contractor, started encountering service lines that were not supposed to be in conflict with the project. So NIPSCO had given us a signed-off, no-conflict work order, which said that they had stuff in the area, but based on our construction documents, we wouldn't encounter any of those. Very early on, it became clear that that was not the case. If it had been other utilities that had not located for us, had it been cable or telephone or something like that, the contractors would have basically been within their right to cut the lines and keep on moving. Being that they were gas lines, obviously couldn't do that, and so there were a lot of restrictions put on the work because of that. There were delays on every time they encountered something. They had to call NIPSCO to come and verify whether it was a live service line and all of that. And so days and then leading on to weeks were lost as it became clear that we could not work around their conflicts. They would just have to relocate their services. And so they had to go out with their own contractors and spend several weeks relocating all of the services and gas mains along that section to get them out of conflict with our project where they were supposed to be. Now, because of that, we ran into a lot of delays and some lost time that Dyckman should have been compensated for. They had to spend extra time working around some of these services and, hours at a time with expensive crews out there that had to be paid, and they couldn't do certain levels of work. So some of those costs were adding up, and so we entered into discussions with NIPSCO very early on about how we would be compensated for that, because we knew that costs were going to escalate. We did everything that we could to get it done towards the end of last year and got everything but some of the finishing touches and the last layer of asphalt on. And then we also held off on the Fifth Street portion so that all of that asphalt could be put down together. But because we had to wait on that, there were unit price increases going into the next year. Had we got it done in '22, it would have been the same price, but because it folded over into '23, Central Paving and some of the other suppliers had to increase their prices on asphalt and concrete and
NIPSCO
so on.
going to compensate us for that?
So they have, and that was, it was a long process with our engineers, so we're grateful for Crossroads Engineers and Andrew Wolf for their work. Did a ton of work on this project for us that they themselves were not compensated for, and they haven't asked for that. They just wanted to get us through it, so we're grateful for that. But we did come to an agreement towards the end of last year that NIPSCO would cover us for any overages that we had. We came up with estimates based on what we knew we had already incurred. So at that time, we had already incurred around $25,000 in extra costs on the project, just from what Dyckman had to do and what we owed them. But we knew that going into the next year, we would add several more. And so that the total costs that we estimated at that time were in the $111,000 range. I think 111 and some change is what the check
17, I think.
117, yeah. But whatever it is, the actual overages I think, came out to 104,000, so we actually got a little bit more, but they wanted to sign off on a number early on. So we actually covered the increase in costs and added a little bit more that we can use for other city functions. But that's what this is for, is that we came to a settlement agreement with them to cover all of the overages for the project that they caused. And we just got the check and have to put that in because we held off on some of the change orders for the project. We knew that Dykeman would be entitled to some of this money, but we held off on the change orders because they were working with us and letting us go through our process with NIPSCO, doing everything we could to avoid litigation, and we did, fortunately, and they covered all of the costs and some. So we're grateful for the resolution that we came to. But to pay out what we owe Dykeman now and the other contractors, we have to move this money into the fund because they wrote us a check and it got put elsewhere. So, yeah,
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jacob.
of course.
You guys are okay with that? We'll move it in the community, and that way everything gets paid out of that fund.
One back at NIPSCO.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. The last thing on the agenda, Jacob, there's only three of us. Let's maybe do that at council meeting.
Yeah, I can get you the numbers and I'll play have you shared the video with the other people or?
I don't have the video,
Okay,
but,
well, we'll play that for the other council members then.
okay. You can kind of tell us where we're at with that project? Okay. The last thing is an allocation of funds for water line replacement at the cemetery. I told Bobby he didn't need to stick around. Basically, he's had Mint, it's in your packet there, what's the name of them here? Mint City Underground replaced a bunch of water lines out there for him that were agreed by LMU to put in for him. They're gonna pay the cost of the work that was done out there. But he's still got a leak out there that isn't covered with the agreement we had with LMU. So what he would like to do, he's priced it out. The cost of the work of labor would be $28,000, and I believe the material costs were around $13,000, or $15,000 there if you look at it. The problem he's getting into is that it's 30 weeks to order this stuff.
What now?
They're estimating he wouldn't get the material for up to 30 weeks, 25 to 30 weeks, which puts him at the end of the year. So Dwayne and I spoke with him, and what we're hoping to do is write a resolution stating that it'll be in his capital improvement plan for 2024 with the expectation he's not going to get it to the end of the year. And 30 weeks puts you at the end of December, basically. And that way, he would have the material, so then Mid-City Underground could come in the spring and fix the rest of the water line problems we have out the cemetery, and then the cemetery is back up to working 100%.
Okay.
But we needed to get some type of approval. Dwayne says he thinks we can work it out this way, and if you guys are okay with that, we can move that forward.
Yeah. Good.
Total cost would be around $43,000 to $45,000 to finish out his water lines at the cemetery.
How old is the old line?
Some is real old. I don't know how, the newer part where there is a leak is only around 20 years old, but
Okay, yeah.
that's the new stuff,
Yeah.
so.
Not bad.
Well, this has seemed to be an issue for as long as I've known him. So,
Everybody all right with that then?
yeah.
Okay. All right, I think that's it. Anybody else got anything? Bill, come on up.
I know it appears sometimes we get a little combative. I think people just have a passion for Logansport. I think we all just want to make it better. And so I respect the comments. And one thing I would ask, actually, only time I've ever spoken to Paul directly is about 2 years ago, he invited me out to his place, and I think the conversation went well. It was about a project in Midtown, and I was supportive, and since I haven't heard a word directly. So I would just say, if you ever have a comment or a suggestion about any of these projects, just give me a call. I'm not real hard to find. I'm always at work downtown, and just reach out, we'll talk about it. It doesn't need to be this blitzing of whatever comments, let's just talk about it. It's that easy, so.
Thank you, Bill.
Good to have a couple of different opinions to discuss on things. It's healthy.
And unfortunately, as we see tonight, you can invite the public, but they just don't come.
And we didn't get a Wendy's overnight, so let's just all remember that.
Did we get Wendy's? Okay, 6:56, let's close the Finance Committee meeting.